Amara Kline's trembling fingers hovered over the post button, her suicide note typed and ready to share with the world at 11:47 p.m. on Christmas Eve. The scarf wrapped around her ravaged face caught her tears as she stared at her phone screen. 3 years of medical hell summarized in 280 characters. It wasn't a goodbye message. It was a countdown. Her bedroom door burst open without warning, causing Amara to drop her phone with sharp crack against the hardwood floor. Her grandmother, Evelyn, stood in the doorway, her usually steady hand shaking as she clutched an old leather suitcase, her weathered face pale as moonlight. "Amara, honey," Evelyn whispered, her voice breaking with urgency. "I need to tell you something I should have told you 60 years ago. What secret had her grandmother carried for 6 decades? And why was she here now, when Amara had already given up? The Kline family had once been the kind of people others envied. 3 years ago, Victor Kline earned 6 figures as a senior automotive engineer at Ford, while his wife Nora worked part-time as a pediatric nurse, more for passion than necessity. Their daughters were their pride. Amara, the homecoming queen turned pre-med student at University of Michigan, and Lila, the high school star athlete with college scouts already calling. Their colonial house in Dearborn sat on a tree-lined street, where neighbors borrowed sugar and kids played until streetlights came on. Amara's Instagram account boasted 50,000 followers who watched her document her journey toward becoming a pediatric dermatologist, inspired by her desire to help children feel confident in their own skin. The irony would prove devastating. It started as a few stubborn pimples during Amara's sophomore year at Michigan. College stress, the campus health center dismissed, but within 6 months, her face had transformed into something from a medical textbook. Angry, weeping cysts that spread across her cheeks, forehead, and down her neck. The confident young woman who'd once posed for magazine covers now hid behind scarves and oversized hoodies. 17 dermatologists later, the diagnosis varied. Severe cystic acne, rare autoimmune disorder, stress-induced inflammation. The treatments were equally diverse and equally unsuccessful. Antibiotics destroyed her stomach lining. Topical steroids thinned her skin until it bled at the slightest touch. Experimental procedures left her face more damaged than before. Each failed treatment cost thousands, and the Kline's insurance covered less each time. Victor took out a second mortgage, then a third. Nora picked up extra shifts until exhaustion became her permanent state. The medical bills climbed. $50,000, $100,000, $200,000. Their dream home went into foreclosure. The family moved into a cramped rental. Their furniture sat in storage they couldn't afford to retrieve. Amara withdrew from university, losing her scholarship and her future in one devastating semester. Her relationship with her longtime boyfriend ended when he admitted he couldn't handle her appearance. Social media became a battlefield of cruel comments and unsolicited advice. The girl who'd once inspired thousands now deleted every photo of herself from the internet. Lila watched her sister disappear into their shared bedroom, emerging only for doctor appointments that brought nothing but disappointment. The family's dinner conversations revolved around medical bills and insurance appeals. Laughter became a foreign sound in their house. The weight of failure pressed down on everyone. Victor's engineering mind couldn't solve this problem. Nora's nursing knowledge felt useless, and Lila watched helplessly as her family disintegrated around her sister's suffering. Meanwhile, Evelyn Rose Carter, Victor's mother, lived 30 miles away in a farmhouse where she'd raised her son after her husband died in Vietnam. At 78, she survived on Social Security and a small pension from her decades as a seamstress. She visited rarely, claiming her old bones couldn't handle the drive. But the truth was harder to bear. Watching her granddaughter suffer, while feeling powerless to help her become unbearable. Evelyn carried secrets from her past that she'd sworn never to share, believing some knowledge was too dangerous, too painful to pass down. The breaking point came during Thanksgiving dinner, when Amara didn't come downstairs at all. The family ate in silence around an empty chair, the absence more present than any conversation could have been. Victor stared at the medical bills scattered across the kitchen counter. Another $89,000 from Amara's latest failed treatment. Nora moved mechanically between kitchen and table, her nurse's training unable to help her own daughter. Lila, now 17 and wise beyond her years from watching her family's destruction, finally spoke the words everyone was thinking. "She's going to kill herself, isn't she?" The silence that followed confirmed what they all knew but couldn't say. Amara had stopped fighting. She'd stopped hoping. The vibrant young woman who'd once believed she could heal the world was now planning her exit from it. That night, Victor found himself standing outside Amara's locked bedroom door, listening to the silence within and wondering how a family could survive losing a child as something that should have been treatable. Nora sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by medical bills and insurance denials, crying quietly into her hands. Evelyn, 30 miles away in her farmhouse, lay awake staring at the ceiling. For 60 years, she kept her secrets buried, convinced that some knowledge was too dangerous to share. But as Christmas approached and her granddaughter's despair deepened, she began to understand that keeping silent might be the most dangerous choice of all. The leather suitcase in her bedroom closet hadn't been opened in decades. Inside, wrapped in cloth that smelled of old lavender, were items she'd hoped never to need again. A small notebook filled with careful handwriting, photographs that captured both horror and hope, and formulas, detailed instructions for healing remedies that had saved her life 70 years ago in a place where death was more common than hope. Dr. Elias Rosenberg had been a dermatologist in Berlin before the war stole everything from him except his knowledge. In Auschwitz, with no proper medical supplies, he'd learned to heal using whatever plants and natural ingredients he could find. The treatments he developed weren't just medical. They were acts of resistance, proof that humanity could survive even in hell. Evelyn had been one of his patients, a young woman whose face bore the same devastating inflammation that now marked her granddaughter. When Dr. Rosenberg was murdered by the guards, he'd made Evelyn promise to remember his formulas, to carry them forward. Somewhere will need this knowledge, he'd whispered. Promise me you'll be ready when that time comes. For 60 years, Evelyn had convinced herself that time would never come. She'd built a new life, raised a son, buried her husband, and tried to forget everything about the person she'd been before America. But Amara's suffering had awakened something in her. Not just a memory of Dr. Rosenberg's remedies, but the understanding that some promises transcend time. Christmas Eve arrived with the kind of bitter cold that made Michigan winters feel personal. Evelyn's ancient Buick coughed to life in the pre-dawn darkness, its headlights cutting through frost as she made the 30-mile drive she'd avoided for months. The leather suitcase on her passenger seat held more than clothes. It contained secrets she'd buried for 60 years and hoped never to excavate. The Kline family's rental house sat in a neighborhood where Christmas decorations couldn't quite mask the underlying desperation. Foreclosure signs dotted the street like grave markers. Evelyn's arthritic hands gripped the steering wheel as she parked, steeling herself for what she had to do. But would her family believe her? Would they trust remedies that sounded like folklore? And most importantly, would Amara have enough fight left in her to try one more time? As Evelyn walked toward the house where her granddaughter was planning to die, she whispered a prayer to Dr. Rosenberg's memory. Let this be the time you were talking about. Let this knowledge finally serve its purpose. The weight of 60 years of silence pressed down on her shoulders, but for the first time since the war, Evelyn felt ready to speak the truth that might save a life. The question wasn't whether she had the courage to break her silence. It was whether her family had the courage to believe in healing that came from the darkest chapters of human history. The morning of December 23rd arrived with the kind of bitter cold that made Michigan winters feel personal. Evelyn's ancient Buick coughed to life in the pre-dawn darkness, its headlights cutting through the frost as she made the 30-mile drive she'd avoided for months. The leather suitcase on her passenger seat held more than clothes. It contained secrets she'd buried for 60 years and hoped never to excavate. The Kline family's rental house sat in a neighborhood where Christmas decorations couldn't quite mask the underlying desperation. Foreclosure signs dotted the street like grave markers. Evelyn's arthritic hands gripped the steering wheel as she parked, steeling herself for what she had to do. Victor answered the door in his bathrobe, his face showing the kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't cure. Mom, what are you doing here so early? Is everything okay? No, Victor. Nothing's okay. Evelyn pushed past her son, her suitcase wheels rattling across the threshold. Where is she? Nora emerged from the kitchen, dark circles under her eyes, evidence of another sleepless night spent calculating bills they couldn't pay. In her hands, she clutched an envelope marked "Final Notice" in red letters. Another medical bill, this one for $89,000 from Amara's last failed treatment. "She won't come down," Nora whispered, glancing toward the staircase. "She hasn't eaten in 2 days. Victor's talking about having her committed for her own safety." Evelyn's weathered face hardened. "Over my dead body." The tension in the room crackled like static electricity. Victor's jaw clenched as he faced his mother. "We've tried everything, Mom. Everything. 17 doctors, experimental treatments, alternative medicine. Nothing works. We've bankrupted ourselves chasing false hope, and now we're going to lose her anyway." False hope. Evelyn's voice carried an edge that made both her son and daughter-in-law step back. "Let me tell you about false hope, Victor. False hope is believing that modern medicine has all the answers. False hope is thinking that expensive means better. False hope is giving up on your daughter because some doctors in white coats can't figure out what your grandmother could have told them from the start." Nora clutched the medical bill tighter. "What are you talking about?" Evelyn set down her suitcase with deliberate care. "I'm talking about the fact that Amara doesn't have some mysterious, incurable condition. She is exactly what I had when I was her age, and I know how to fix it." The silence that followed was deafening. Victor stared at his mother as if she'd spoken in tongues. "You never had anything like what Amara has. I would have remembered." "Would you?" Evelyn interrupted, rolling up the long sleeves she always wore, even in summer heat. The skin on her forearms bore faint but unmistakable scars. The kind of scarring that spoke of years of severe inflammation. "I spent 60 years making sure you wouldn't remember. Making sure no one would know." Nora gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The medical bill fluttered to the floor, forgotten. "I need to see her," Evelyn continued, her voice soft but immovable. "Alone." "Mom, she won't," Victor began. "She'll see me." Evelyn was already heading for the stairs, her age-spotted hands trailing along the banisters she'd helped install when Victor and Nora first bought their dream house. Back when the family still believed in happy endings. Amara's bedroom door was locked, but Evelyn had raised a son in this house's sister home. She knew every creaking board, every stubborn lock. She knocked gently. "Amara, honey, it's Grandma Eve." "Silence. I know you're planning to leave us tonight, sweetheart. I also know why you think it's your only choice." Evelyn pressed her forehead against the door. "But I need you to know something first. You're not the first person in this family to stand where you're standing. And if you'll let me, you won't be the last person to find their way back." The lock clicked open. Amara stood in the doorway, her face hidden behind a thick scarf that covered everything but her eyes. Those eyes, once bright with ambition and joy, now held the hollow look of someone who'd endured too much pain for too long. "Don't look at me," Amara whispered, backing away as Evelyn entered the room. "Baby girl, I've been looking at faces like yours for 70 years. Every morning in the mirror until I learn what I'm about to teach you." Evelyn closed the door behind her and sat heavily on Amara's bed. "Take off that scarf." "Grandma, you don't understand." I understand that you think you're a monster. I understand that you believe no one could love you looking the way you do. I understand because I felt exactly the same way when I was 22 years old, standing in a place much darker than this bedroom. Wanted to die rather than live another day in skin that felt like a prison." Amara's hands trembled as they moved toward the scarf. "The doctor said—" "The doctors don't know everything, sweetheart. Some knowledge gets passed down through bloodlines, not medical textbooks." Amara's scarf dropped to the floor like a fallen curtain, revealing the devastation beneath. Evelyn had prepared herself, but the sight of her granddaughter's face still hit her like a physical blow. The angry, weeping lesions covered Amara's cheeks, forehead, and neck. Inflammation so severe it had transformed her beautiful features into something unrecognizable. Yet Evelyn saw beyond the damage, the terrified young woman hiding beneath. "Oh, my sweet girl." Evelyn's voice broke as she reached toward Amara's face, stopping just short of touching. "This is exactly what I look like. Exactly." Amara flinched away. Don't lie to make me feel better. Grandma, you've always been beautiful. Beautiful. Evelyn laughed, but there was no humor in it. Child, I spent the first 25 years of my life believing I was cursed, that God had marked me for suffering. She rolled up her sleeves further, revealing more scars, faded now but telling their story across decades. These marks, they're from the same condition you have. It's in our bloodline. Amara. It skipped your father, but it found you. The revelation hit Amara like cold water. You mean this is genetic? As genetic as your blue eyes and your stubborn streak. Evelyn settled more comfortably on the bed, her joints creaking audibly. But more importantly, it's treatable. Has been for 70 years, if you know what you're looking for. Downstairs, the sound of heated whispers carried through thin walls. Victor's voice, frustrated and desperate. She's filling Amara's head with false hope again. Nora's response, equally strained. What if she's not? What if we've been missing something? Evelyn heard them and sighed. Your parents think I'm a foolish old woman clinging to superstitions. They're not wrong about the old woman part. She fixed Amara with a steady gaze. But they are wrong about the foolish part. What I'm going to tell you might sound like superstition, but it saved my life and it can save yours. Amara sank into her desk chair, her reflection in the dark computer screen, showing the Christmas decorations scattered around her room. Remnants of a girl who'd once believed in magic and miracles. Grandma, we've tried everything. 17 doctors. Treatments that cost more than most people's houses. If there was something that worked, don't you think they would have found it? Would they? Evelyn's question hung in the air. Tell me, sweetheart, did any of those 17 doctors ask you about your family history beyond 2 generations? Did they ask about traditional remedies, about what your great-great-grandmother might have used when she couldn't afford a doctor? Amara shook her head slowly. That's because modern medicine has a blind spot the size of Texas when it comes to traditional knowledge. They want peer-reviewed studies and clinical trials for everything, even remedies that have been working for hundreds of years. Evelyn leaned forward, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. What I'm about to tell you, I've never told another living soul. Not your grandfather, not your father, not anyone. The house seemed to hold its breath. Even the arguing downstairs had stopped. I wasn't born Evelyn Rose Carter. My name was Daria Kowalska, and I came to this country in 1946 after spending 2 years in a place where people weren't meant to survive. Evelyn's hands clasped together, so tightly her knuckles went white. I was in Auschwitz, Amara, a concentration camp. And that's where I learned about the remedy that's going to save your life. Amara's world tilted. Her grandmother, her sweet, gentle grandmother who made the best apple pie in Michigan and never missed church on Sunday, was a Holocaust survivor. Grandma, I don't understand. You never said. Because some stories are too heavy to carry unless you have to. Evelyn's voice carried the weight of decades of silence. In that camp, there was a doctor, Dr. Elias Rosenberg. He was a dermatologist from Berlin before they took everything from him. In the camp, with no proper medical supplies, he had to improvise, use whatever plants and natural ingredients he could find to treat the skin conditions that came from malnutrition and the horrible living conditions. Evelyn stood and walked to Amara's window, looking out at the Christmas lights twinkling in the neighborhood. Dr. Rosenberg noticed that some of us had inherited inflammatory skin conditions that got worse under stress and poor nutrition. He developed a treatment using common plants and natural ingredients, things that even in that hellish place we could sometimes find. Did it work? Amara's voice was barely audible. It saved my life. Literally. Evelyn turned back to her granddaughter. Not just my skin, though that healed completely within months, but my will to live. Dr. Rosenberg told me something I've never forgotten. Sometimes the most powerful medicine comes from the humblest sources. And sometimes healing the body is the first step to healing the soul. Amara stared at her grandmother, seeing her with completely new eyes. What happened to Dr. Rosenberg? Evelyn's face clouded. He didn't make it out. But before the end, he made me promise to remember the formula, to carry it forward. Someone, somewhere will need this knowledge, he told me. Promise me you'll be ready when that time comes. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of history and possibility. Finally, Amara spoke. You think that time is now? I know it is. Evelyn returned to bed, sitting close enough to take Amara's scarred hands in her own weathered ones. But I need you to understand something, sweetheart. This isn't going to be easy. The treatment takes months, not days. Some of the ingredients are expensive and hard to find, and there are no guarantees. Amara looked down at their joined hands, one pair marked by recent trauma, the other by old survival. How expensive? Evelyn's hesitation told Amara everything. I have some money saved. Grandma, we've already bankrupted the family. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. Evelyn's grip tightened. I've been saving for 60 years, waiting for the day I might need Dr. Rosenberg's gift again. This is that day. Downstairs, the front door slammed. Victor's voice carried up the stairs. I'm going for a drive. I can't watch this anymore. Evelyn and Amara sat in the resulting silence. Two women separated by 6 decades, but connected by blood, by suffering, and now by hope. If I say yes, Amara whispered, if I try this, what happens if it doesn't work? Evelyn smiled, and for the first time, Amara saw not just her grandmother's kindness, but her survivor's strength. Then we'll have tried something that comes from love instead of desperation. But Amara, she cupped her granddaughter's damaged face gently. It's going to work. Dr. Rosenberg's remedies always worked. The question isn't whether it will heal you. The question is whether you're brave enough to believe in healing again. The weight of the decision pressed down on both women. Outside, snow began to fall, covering the world in white that looked like either a fresh start or a burial shroud, depending on how you chose to see it. For the first time in months, Amara felt something stir in her chest that might have been hope. Christmas Eve dinner was a minefield of unspoken tensions. Victor had returned from his drive with red-rimmed eyes and a 6-pack of beer that remained untouched on the kitchen counter. Nora moved mechanically between the stove and table, serving a meal no one had appetite for. Lila sat picking at her mashed potatoes, glancing between her parents and grandmother with the cautious awareness of a teenager who'd learned to read the emotional weather in her household. Amara had come downstairs for the first time in weeks, her face still hidden behind a scarf, but her presence at the dinner table felt like a small miracle. Evelyn sat across from her, occasionally catching her granddaughter's eye with encouraging nods. So, Victor finally broke the silence, his voice carefully controlled. Mom tells me she has a cure for Amara. The word cure dripped with skepticism. Not a cure, Evelyn corrected gently. A treatment. There's a difference. Right, a treatment. Victor set down his fork with deliberate precision. A treatment that 17 board-certified dermatologists somehow missed. A treatment that comes from... He gestured vaguely, unable to voice the Holocaust reference. From experience, Evelyn finished. From watching it work. Nora cleared her throat. Evelyn, I need to ask this treatment. What does it involve exactly? And... She hesitated, glancing at the stack of medical bills on the counter. What would it cost? Evelyn had been expecting this question. She excused herself and returned with her leather suitcase, placing it on the dining room table between the Christmas centerpiece and the untouched ham. The latches clicked open with the finality of a decision made. Inside, neat stacks of cash were bundled with rubber bands. $47,000 accumulated over decades of careful saving. Victor's beer slipped from his hand, foam spilling across the tablecloth. Mom, what the hell? Where did you get this money? Language, Victor. Evelyn's rebuke was automatic, honed by years of motherhood. This is my life savings. Everything I've put away since your father died. I was saving it for... She paused, her hand resting on one of the bundles. Well, I thought I was saving it for my funeral expenses. Turns out I was saving it for something more important. The room fell silent, except for the soft hiss of beer foam dissolving into linen. Lila was the first to speak, her voice small but clear. That's enough money to pay off the house, isn't it? Lila, Nora started. No, let her ask. Evelyn said, "Yes, sweetheart, it probably is. But houses can be replaced. Granddaughters cannot." Victor pushed back on the table, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I won't let you bankrupt yourself for a treatment that probably won't work. We've already destroyed our own finances chasing miracles. This isn't your choice to make, Victor." Evelyn's voice carried the authority of someone who'd survived things her son couldn't imagine. "This is my money, my granddaughter, and my decision." "But it's not just your decision," Amara interjected, her voice muffled by the scarf. "If this doesn't work, everyone suffers. You lose your life savings. My parents feel even more guilty, and I—" She trailed off, unable to voice the obvious conclusion. Evelyn reached across the table and placed her hand over Amara's. "Dr. Rosenberg once told me something about hope. He said, 'Hope isn't about believing everything will work out perfectly. Hope is about believing that trying is better than surrendering.'" "Pretty words," Victor muttered, "but hope doesn't pay medical bills." "Neither does despair," Evelyn shot back, her patience finally fraying. "Victor, I've watched you and Nora tear yourselves apart for 3 years, trying to fix something you don't understand. You've mortgaged your future, worked yourselves to exhaustion, and convinced yourselves that if you just spent enough money or found the right specialist, you could solve this." She gestured toward Amara. "Look at her. Really look at her. Has all that money and expertise brought her any closer to healing?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Nora's eyes filled with tears as she actually really looked, at her daughter for the first time in months. Not at the medical problem to be solved, but at the young woman disappearing behind layers of pain and despair. "What exactly does this treatment involve?" Nora asked quietly. Evelyn opened a small notebook, its pages yellowed with age. "The formula requires specific plants and minerals. Some are common: chamomile, honey, green tea. Others are more unusual. There's a particular type of clay that only comes from specific mountain regions, a root that grows wild in Appalachian forests, and several herbs that—" She hesitated, "that need to be prepared in very particular ways at very particular times." "That sounds like—" Victor began. "Like what? Like traditional medicine?" Evelyn's eyes flashed. "Like the kind of knowledge that kept people alive for thousands of years before pharmaceutical companies existed?" "Yes, Victor, it does sound like that, because that's exactly what it is." Lila leaned forward, her teenage curiosity overriding the family tension. "Grandma Eve, when you had this condition, how bad was it? Like as bad as Amara's?" Evelyn pulled out a small photograph from her notebook, a black and white image of a young woman whose face was barely recognizable beneath severe inflammation and lesions. The resemblance to Amara's current condition was unmistakable. "Worse," Evelyn said simply. "This was taken about 6 months before I started Dr. Rosenberg's treatment. I was 22, just like Amara is now." Nora gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The photograph looked like a medical textbook illustration of the most severe inflammatory skin conditions imaginable. And this treatment, it healed that. Amara's voice was barely a whisper. Evelyn produced a second photograph. The same young woman, 18 months later, with clear, healthy skin and bright, hopeful eyes. Completely, within a year, you couldn't tell I'd ever had a skin problem. The silence that followed was different from the earlier tension. This was a silence of possibility, of hope tentatively raising its head after years of disappointment. How long would the treatment take? Nora asked, her nurse's training taking over. Minimum 6 months, possibly longer, depending on how Amar's body responds. Evelyn returned the photographs to her notebook. And it has to be done exactly as prescribed. No shortcuts, no substitutions, no stopping when things get difficult. And they will get difficult before they get better. Victor ran his hands through his graying hair. 6 months of what? Herbal tea and meditation? Come on, Mom. 6 months of daily applications, twice daily ingestion of specific preparations, dietary restrictions, and complete lifestyle changes. Evelyn replied crisply. This isn't some new age wellness routine, Victor. This is a medical treatment that happens to use natural ingredients instead of synthetic ones. Amara looked up from the photographs. her eyes showing more life than they'd held in months. The ingredients you mentioned, the rare ones. How will we even find them? That's where it gets complicated. Evelyn's expression grew troubled. Some of them can be ordered from specialty suppliers, but they're expensive. The mountain clay costs about $8,000 for the amount we'd need. The Appalachian root? Well, that has to be harvested personally during specific seasons. Harvested personally, Nora repeated, meaning we'd have to go get it ourselves? There's only one place I know of where it grows wild, and it's a 3-day drive from here in the mountains of West Virginia. Victor laughed, but there was no humor in it. So let me get this straight. You want us to spend our life savings on expensive clay and take a road trip to dig up roots in the mountains, all based on something you learned 70 years ago from a doctor who died in a concentration camp. That's exactly what I'm suggesting, Evelyn replied without hesitation. The room fell silent again. Outside, snow began to fall, dusting the Christmas lights with white sparkles that seemed to mock the darkness of the conversation inside. Lila broke the silence. I think we should try it. Everyone turned to stare at the 17-year-old, who rarely spoke during family discussions. Lila, Victor started. No, Dad. Listen. Lila's voice grew stronger. For 3 years, we've tried a logical approach. We've trusted the experts, spent money we didn't have, and Amara's gotten worse, not better. Maybe sometimes a logical approach isn't the right approach. You can't be serious, Victor said. I'm completely serious. Lila looked directly at her sister. Amara, before all this started, you were the person who taught me to take risks, to try things that scared me. Remember when I was afraid to try out for varsity soccer as a freshman? You told me the worst thing that could happen was I'd fail, but the best thing that could happen was I'd succeed beyond my wildest dreams. Amara's eyes filled with tears behind her scarf. This is your varsity soccer tryout. Lila continued. Except instead of making a team, you're trying to get your life back. Nora wiped her eyes with her napkin. Victor, maybe we should consider. Consider what? Throwing away Mom's life savings on folk medicine. Victor's voice rose. Nora, you're a nurse. You know how medicine works. You can't seriously be thinking about this. I'm thinking about the fact that real medicine hasn't worked, Nora replied, her voice steady despite her tears. I'm thinking about the fact that our daughter was planning to kill herself tonight, and now she's sitting at our dinner table looking hopeful for the first time in 3 years. Victor looked around the table at his family, his wife's determined face, his younger daughter's earnest support, his mother's quiet strength, and finally his older daughter's scar but hopeful eyes. If we do this, he said slowly, if we actually do this insane thing, what happens if it doesn't work? What happens to Mom's retirement? What happens when Amara... He couldn't finish the sentence. Then at least we'll know we tried everything, Evelyn said gently. Victor, I'm 78 years old. I've lived through a world war, a concentration camp, immigration, raising a child alone, and 60 years of keeping secrets that nearly killed me. The one thing I've learned is that the biggest regrets in life come from the chances we don't take, not the ones we do. Amara slowly unwrapped her scarf, revealing her damaged face to the family for the first time in months. I want to try it, she said, her voice clear and determined. If Grandma Eve thinks it will work, I want to try it. Victor stared at his daughter, seeing not just the physical damage, but the glimmer of hope that had been missing for so long. He looked at his wife, who nodded almost imperceptibly. He looked at his younger daughter, whose faith in the impossible had always been stronger than his own. Finally, he looked at his mother, who had survived things he couldn't comprehend, and emerged with enough strength to save her granddaughter. Okay, he whispered, then cleared his throat and spoke louder. Okay, we tried Grandma's treatment. All in. Evelyn smiled, the first genuine smile she'd worn since arriving. Then we start tomorrow. Christmas Day seems like the perfect time for a miracle to begin. But what Evelyn didn't tell them, what she couldn't tell them, was a secret she'd been hiding since October. The persistent cough, the weight loss, the exhaustion that went beyond her age, the x-rays that had revealed shadows in her lungs and abdomen, the oncologist who'd recommended immediate chemotherapy for the pancreatic cancer that was already spreading through her body. She'd made a choice that night in October, staring at the treatment schedule that would cost $50,000 and might give her 6 more months. She'd chosen to save that money, to use those months for something more important than extending her own life. As her family made plans around the dinner table, Evelyn felt a familiar pain in her abdomen, the shortness of breath that was getting worse each day. She had maybe 3 months left, possibly less. Just enough time to see Amara's healing begin, to pass on Dr. Rosenberg's knowledge, and fulfill the promise she'd made 70 years ago. Some gifts, she knew, require the ultimate sacrifice, and some love was so fierce it would choose another's future over its own present. The snow continued to fall outside, covering the world in white that looked like either hope or surrender, depending on how you chose to see it. Evelyn's funeral revealed the true scope of her hidden life. An elderly Holocaust survivor named Isaac Blum introduced himself, explaining that Evelyn had been quietly using Dr. Rosenberg's remedies to help others for 60 years. Holocaust survivors, immigrants without insurance, elderly people too proud to ask for help. She'd never charged a penny. In her final gift to Amara, Evelyn left behind a leather notebook containing hundreds of pages of meticulously recorded formulas, preparation methods, and case studies. 60 years of healing knowledge, refined through practical application, documented with the precision of clinical research. Today, the Evelyn Rose Carter Foundation for Traditional Healing operates from her old farmhouse, bridging the gap between traditional knowledge and modern medicine. Amara, her face completely healed, has helped over 200 families while pursuing a doctorate in ethnobotany. The pharmaceutical company developing her skin treatment acknowledges Evelyn and Dr. Rosenberg publicly, with profits funding research into other traditional remedies.